Welcome to the Sustainability in Motion podcast, brought to you by ED4S. We focus on the fast-moving sustainability world to help the business community better understand the sustainability and environmental challenges we face. I'm Orsagh, Chief Content Officer at ED4S.
And I'm Nawar Alsaadi, founder and CEO of Kanata Advisors and Chief Advisor to ED4S.
Today, we're going to be talking about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD. Now, if you're a company that is going to have to comply with CSRD, a shiver might have just gone up your spine, but we hope we can help you with that. We'll be talking to Erin Nolles, manager at Position Green, which advises companies and helps them navigate the sustainability landscape, and they're going to be seeing a lot of their clients needing help with CSRD. So thanks, Erin, for talking to us today. All right, first, let's set the scene for this big, scary, CSRD. What is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive? Broadly, what is it? What does it cover? How did we get here? A little bit of the history. And if you could give us a little history of how CSRD came about, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, of course. Let's start with the history. So Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, actually replaced the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which that acronym is NFRD. So if we look as far back as NFRD, we have roots going back to 2014, so almost a decade ago. And this is when the concept of enhancing transparency within sustainability was meaningfully introduced within the EU. And so without going too deep into that, let's just say that over the years, this evolved, and in 2021, CSRD was officially introduced. After several rounds of feedback, a lot of reviews, it was ultimately approved and came into force in January of 2023. And in its most basic terms, it sets requirements for annual sustainability reporting for companies in the EU or with substantial business dealings in the EU. And something of note, and what is quite interesting here, is that in contrast to NFRD, CSRD requires integrated reporting of financial effects from sustainability matters. So this is a key shift in the way we report on sustainability, and it's transforming how business handles and communicates sustainability impacts, risks, and opportunities. I think for the first time ever, we're really seeing sustainability information being reported on par with financial reporting.
Yeah, let's dig a bit deeper here, Erin. I mean, you do mention that it's a first in many ways. Can you just maybe take us a bit deeper into what is in there exactly, how complex it is, how detailed it is, which kind of reporting companies have to do? Any additional color on this, I think, would be helpful to our audience.
So within CSRD, there are general requirements and disclosures that all companies need to report on. Then there are topic-specific standards within environment, social, and governance categories. I think something to be aware of here is that CSRD is actually industry agnostic. So you kind of take this broad overview and then you do a materiality assessment to kind of figure out what the company needs to report on as it is mandated by CSRD. So I think something super important, and everyone's probably heard a lot about if you're reading about CSRD, is the double materiality assessment process. And that's really the first step into the CSRD compliance. So the double materiality assessment is different from maybe a materiality assessment you may have been used to in the past. And what this does is actually look at both materiality from an impact standpoint, so the impact a company has on people and the planet, and then also the financial effect of things like climate change or things like human rights related issues. So it really takes that outside in, inside out look. And again, this goes back to having this sort of this brand new way of reporting, is that it really for the first time puts a methodology to attaching financial value to these sustainability matters.
So more broadly, what does this mean? Or maybe not broadly, but specifically, what does this mean for companies who will have to comply? We're just starting to get into, companies having to prepare for this. I guess tell us a little bit about the timelines and deadlines folks will have. Are they ready? What advice would you give to companies that need to comply about the preparation they're going to need? I've talked to companies here in the US who do business in Europe. They're going to have to start complying. And I remember early last year, I was talking to this Fortune 500 company, someone from, for the CSO, and they had a small team and they're already starting to look at this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because time is the best friend that you can have right now. Right. So a key finding from Position Green's ESG 100 report last year, that's a report that we do annually that assesses the listed companies in Scandinavian market. So Position Green was founded there. So that's kind of where we look at for this report for now. And what we found was that companies on the whole were severely underprepared. And this is in a region that Scandinavia has a reputation for being among some of the most sustainable businesses in the world. So it was quite surprising to see where they were against these CSRD requirements. So I think on average within the Scandinavian listed companies, we found that only 54% of the 68 disclosures that were tested for were actually reported on by these companies on average. So there's a lot of work to do. And as mentioned, my advice and our advice at Position Green is just to get started early, because companies can often underestimate the time that it's going to take to comply. And I would also say, if you are on a sustainability team, or if you know that this is going to be part of your role, really start to wrap your head around it now. Really advocate to management, leadership, decision makers on what resources you're going to need to be able to get through this reporting.
Yeah, that's of course great advice. But I think a big project like this, you don't know what it is until you start doing it. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard a lot of great talk from companies and investors saying, "Oh, we're getting started on it." Investors are asking about it, and companies, "Yeah, we're going to do it." But I think many of them just haven't really jumped in yet, and they don't know what they're in for. So I hope they take your advice and start as soon as they can.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to kind of what's in the full scope of CSRD, going back to those ESG topics and having that double materiality assessment to start. That's the best first starting point. And kind of in the full picture, once you have your topics within those larger categories, environmental, social, governance, identified as far as whether they're impact, financial, or double material, then you can really start to dive in onto the components that you're going to need to report on. And the ultimate goal of all of this is to produce an annual sustainability statement, similar to sustainability reports that we've traditionally seen, but these are going to be subject to limited assurance. So that's the other part of it, is that this whole process is going to be go through the assurance process. So that's, again, why it's important to start early. We actually recommend for companies to, maybe if they know they're going to be in scope, say in 2026 for the 2025 reporting year, do a foundational report where you're looking at CSRD, you're looking at the components that you might need to comply with, but you can kind of use it as your test round before you actually go through that assurance process, because it can be helpful just to see where your gaps are before it's required to go up against scrutiny.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and hopefully it gets easier every year.
Yeah.
You don't have to start from scratch each year.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest lift. And I think it's, it's human nature to kind of see something so large and then just kind of put it off because it seems like too much of a mountain. But it's like with any project, really just taking bite-sized approaches as best you can through time is going to be really your best friend.
Well, Erin, you touched on companies in scope, and I think that's a good segue to what I wanted to ask. Obviously, CSRD, although it is focused on Europe and it's a European Union law, there are a lot of companies who are outside of Europe that apparently are in scope. So firstly, just question on that in terms of what should these companies expect, whether they are directly in scope or potentially they're part of their value chains are in scope. And maybe another aspect I'd like to explore with you, it's something that Matt just touched on, which is the investor point of view. To what extent investors are impacted by CSRD? What should they know about it? I don't know if you can tackle these two questions. I think that'd be very helpful.
Yeah. So I'll maybe start first with the companies that aren't now but will in the future be in scope. So there are certain thresholds for what might put you in scope for CSRD. So from the U.S. perspective, that could be if you have a certain amount of revenue, you do a certain amount of business in Europe, you have a certain amount of employees there. But U.S. companies, for instance, they won't be subject to that for there's a phase-in period. So basically, if you're not listed, you're not EU domiciled, you'll have a little bit more time. I think that's the category when we're looking more at the 2028, 2029 reporting. We do have some clients right now that are, they know it's coming, but it's still a little bit too early for them to report. So they're kind of dipping their toes in the water, kind of doing what we were saying before about just navigating it, keeping an eye on it. And then there's the other side of it where companies, may not be directly affected by it, but they could be affected by it because they have within their value chain, there are certain businesses going on over in Europe. So they might be able to expect being reached out to for a stakeholder interview. So they don't, if they don't have that business over in Europe, they're not going to be required to report, but they could still be asked certain things, asked certain questions, asked for certain information so that their partners in the value chain can then report. So it can have quite a wide reach. And even if you aren't directly affected, you can still expect to hear about this moving forward.
All right. I mean, no, that's helpful. Sorry to cut you off. Just to maybe tie this back to the investors question. Now, obviously, there are European investors and there are foreign investors that invest in European markets or invest in companies that might be in scope. So I think it'd be helpful if you could just give us again your perspective on how investors might be impacted by this or what they should know about CSRD. I mean, potentially there are, we don't want to make this a regulatory conversation, but there is a specific regulation on investors reporting in Europe. Whether the CSRD has any intersecting points with these regulations. If you have anything to share on that point, that could potentially be interesting as well.
Yeah, so I think from the investor perspective, what you could see is being asked to participate in one of those stakeholder interviews. That would be like maybe a kind of direct implication. From the other perspective, I think what CSRD is really meant to do is to provide investors with enhanced reporting so that they can actually make decisions on what their investments are going to be. So this is actually really meant to support the investor perspective because it's going to enable companies across different industries to report comparable and audited information. So I think if anything, investors can just expect more clarity when it comes to sustainability reporting. I know in the past, sustainability reporting has been maybe criticized because of how wishy-washy it can be in terms of claims around what their activities are, what their goals are. And so CSRD at its core is really attempting to address that and make more comparable information available for investors, stakeholders, decision makers across the board.
Thanks, Erin. That was very helpful from an investor's point of view.
Can I go any deeper or is that good?
If you want to speak on this for 3 hours, we'll let you. But I think for the purposes of our audience, I think that's pretty good. Now, Position Green didn't have to, but you guys did your own CSRD exercise. Can you speak to us about what you've learned and how you'll integrate that into the learnings in helping your clients with their ESG CSRD journeys themselves?
Yeah, definitely. So although we're not subject to CSRD, we wanted to lead by example. We're helping so many companies with the whole process, and we really like to walk the walk when we're, not just talk the talk. So we just felt like we were kind of obligated in some ways to do it so that we could speak to it from our own perspective. So that's part of the reason why we did it. It's also great for companies that want to be, a leader in the space. And so they can have reports that are aligned with CSRD, even when not in scope. It can lend major reputational benefits, especially since it's the most extensive reporting standard that we've seen today for these environmental, social governance, sustainability matters. Some benefits that my team found through this process was that it's a real shift in organizational mindset. So even from a team that's seasoned sustainability reporters, they found that they were engaging more with people across the business and aligning accountability, engaging with investors more, engaging with stakeholders within the value chain in ways that they hadn't previously. So as a result, it just feels as though the report has a greater sense of this organization-wide ownership as well as representation. It started some great conversations about where we are performing and where there is much more work to be done. And that's even for a company that's, whole raison d'etre, reason of being is sustainability. I think some of the lessons learned as well, the report and some expectations for those that are diving into this, the report is 2 to 3 times longer, both in length and time of resources required. So it's important to manage those expectations. There is less storytelling and less padding out your green credentials. So, there's not that fluffy storytelling of, we, spent a day pulling weeds from an old playground. You can, if that's part of your story and narrative, that's great. But the purpose of this is to really focus on what's material, double impact financial, and then what you're doing, and then you have the data, and then what you're doing about it. So specificity is now key. It's not calling something climate. It's being very specific that your scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions are impact material. And therefore, how are those impacts being addressed through policy, targets, management, actions, and performance? And then how does that link back to your core business strategy?
I actually have a follow-up on this for changing gears. Do you know how many people actually were involved in preparing this report at Position Green?
Oh, I'm actually so glad you asked that question, because when we published the report, we had a team town hall that I participated in, and they told us about the process, and they also had a little bit of a poll. So they engaged us to make some guesses around how many people they think were involved in this. And so they had different ranges, 1 to 3 people, the core team. Was it 5 to 10? Was it 25? Was it 200? And I honestly, my answer, I think, was around 30. I was like, it's probably 30 people. And then the answer was over 200, because in technical terms, they engaged the entire company, because as an employee of Position Green, I share my information on my commuting data. I share my travel, all of that to feed into our scope 3 emissions reporting. So, from the broader scale, it really is whole company engagement. And then, from the more key stakeholder side, I don't have that exact number of how many kind of interviews or anything we reached out to, but can certainly follow up with you on that, Nawar.
No, that's very helpful.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's interesting from your company's experience. And I would hope that would be the case with a lot of companies. The more they get people involved in doing it and understanding why they're doing it, the easier the process is going to be, and the more buy-in there's going to be for this report and the next one and on. It just becomes part of the culture itself.
Yeah, exactly. Even as a sustainability professional, I really appreciate that our company makes a point, again, to walk the walk, because I felt engaged, and we had the town hall for the publishing. And so things like that are helpful for, a company to make sure something like CSRD isn't just a checking the box activity, but it's actually something that's engaging for your employee base as well.
All right. Well, we're going to end with the easiest question. This is usually kind of the first question, but we wanted to scare people so much with CSRD in the beginning. But tell us a little bit about the work you do, in which, what capacity Position Green helps companies with what they do. A little bit about your journey, how you got here, and what Position Green is up to.
Yeah. So right now, my work is really around double materiality assessments, all of this reporting. And that's because Position Green has developed an entire methodology around this. So over the last 2 years, we've had a team of consultants navigating all of the updates, changes, final conclusions of CSRD, and then building that into a methodology within our software. So we really are doing this to help lessen the burden of the reporting, because it is quite a lot. And so what we've ventured out to do is to essentially crystallize all of that into a approachable way. So as mentioned, the first step is always that double materiality assessment. So what we're doing a lot right now is working with our clients on going through the stakeholder engagement process, the interview, the identification of the impacts, risks, and opportunities that feed into the ultimate decision of materiality. And then from there, once that's all done and you have your categories selected, that's when you move into that sustainability statement report. And so we assist with that as well. As much or as little involvement that's needed, we can do that. And I think one of the great offerings that we have is the fact that we combine the consulting experience with software to make sure that everything's compiled in one place, so that you're not collecting documents across folders, especially when it gets so nuanced. And we've also interpreted the CSRD in a way that we actually can guide, the software itself can guide you through, okay, I have to report on what's called ESRS E1 climate change. We'll have actually the kind of guidance on, okay, that means you need to collect these documents, set these targets type thing. So it's a very helpful solution to just break down the CSRD into more bite-sized steps. Another thing that Position Green does well, we have a lot of public resources on our website. So if you're really getting into this, I'd definitely point you there. There's a lot of insights articles, a lot of guides. We're constantly pushing out information just to be helpful. We're doing webinars, things, obviously podcasts. And so we're just trying to really be a resource for all the sustainability professionals out there.
I can vouch for you on that. I'm guilty. I have gone to the Position Green website to learn on my own.
I'm glad to hear it.
Well, thanks, Erin, for joining us today. I hope we didn't scare too many people, or scare them in the right way. Get them to start, working on CSRD if they indeed have to. And thank everybody for listening to the podcast. You can find all of us on social media if you want to reach out to us, but save your CSRD questions for Erin. She's more qualified than myself or Nawar to answer them. And if you want to learn more about ED4S, you can find us at ed4s.org. Take care.